Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Women's Life Stories, we retell those moments, honest every day, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. The call came while the tree lights were blinking against the window glass. Lake Tahoe throwing back a wavering necklace of gold across the water. I had a pot of chili cooling on the stove and a plate of sugar cookies set to frost, the red sprinkles still in their plastic shaker. My phone hummed on the counter. I wiped my hands, answered. Mom, Tessa said the way Californians say it when they're already walking away. Tonight is just immediate family. The words landed with a soft thud, like snow sliding off a roof. I could still hear music on her end, children laughing, a cork quick popping the scrape of a chair. I stared at the small green light on the dishwasher and said, understood. Then I set the phone down as if it were hot. The house made that hollow winter sound. A big house makes when someone says you don't belong anywhere. Wind at the eaves, heat kicking on the old cherry cabinets ticking as they settled. A cedar wind chime tapped at the porch like a knuckle that wouldn't give up. I stood with my palms on the cool quartz, listening long enough to decide the chili should go into containers that the cookies could harden unfrosted. On the far counter sat my ledger, the blue one with the bent cover and a coffee ring like a small eclipse. I flipped to the page I don't show anyone dates down the left in my careful teacher's script. Amounts down the right. 34 rent payments at $2,100 each, $71,400. A vintage silk wedding gown from a shop on J Street in Sacramento, $1,380 after alterations. Those Italian heels Tessa swore were the only shoes that wouldn't ruin the line of the dress, $420. A tow and a transmission repair on US 50, the winter the box gave out in the pass, $4, $100 and change. Groceries when the boys were toddlers and ate like small wrestlers. Ballet classes before the boys, when there was going to be a ballet instead of boys. I could hear my pen as I wrote the numbers, and I could hear Daniel's voice in my head as I did it. Don't let the ledger be the only place your life appears. I closed the book. The ginger snaps cracked softly in the cool kitchen air. Blue Fir Lodge. Our place sat up the hill past the switchback where the ponderosas lean their big shoulders into the wind, and the lake looks blunt and honest. Daniel and I bought it the year the district cut my art classes, and he said, then we better make our own sanctuary. Stone and cedar, a wide porch windows that drank winter sun. After he died, I left his red wool gloves on a nail by the back door. I didn't move them because some things you don't move. You let them hold the shape of a life. The next 3 days went by like you think they will when you've been told you're not part of something sun up, sun down, the same small chores done slower. I walked the plowed shoulder past the mailboxes, waved at people I knew from the credit union and the hardware store, came home to the same quiet. On the fourth morning, the phone rang again. I didn't check the screen. I knew the cadence. Mom Tessa was all brightness now, a cheery broadcaster. We're going to bring the boys over Sunday and start moving our things into the lodge. Colin found a roof guy. Apparently there's a patch of ice damming near the dormer. Can you leave the keys where he can grab them? We'll be out of your hair before dinner. The lodge. Not Blue Fir. Not ours. I picked up one of Daniel's gloves and felt the knit give under my palm. Didn't I mention the condition, I said. There was a small silence. I could hear a door open and close on her side, the party babble drop away. What condition? It isn't ready. Not ready, how she said with that laugh she uses when she's buying herself time. Mom, it's a house. You unlock it and step inside. I'll let you know, I said and pressed end before the conversation could put on its politeness again and become something we'd both pretend we meant. I don't recommend hanging up on your only child if you enjoy restful nights. The house woke at odd hours and walked its sounds through my hallways. Pipes spoke. Snow fell. The chime kept its insistence. I took the gloves down and turned them over in my hands and let the red wool gather whatever heat was left in me. By noon, I had a second stack of receipts out, those folded paper tongues from grocery lanes, the pink carbon of a repair in a gas station somewhere south of Carson, the typewritten invoice from the violin guy who swapped a broken bridge the year the boys took Suzuki and then abandoned it for soccer. Paper saved my whole life because paper made things visible. I flattened them with the side of my hand and brought the ledger back into the light. I scratched down totals with my father's fountain pen, a little black pelican he gave me when I got hired for my first school job. Don't teach anyone to draw unless you're willing to see what they see. The lake kept its winter voice going while I worked that low shore ice hiss. A plow sang by in second gear. I could smell cold pine off the patio, the bite of it like a tonic. When the numbers gathered into a single row, I stopped and lifted the pen. The page didn't look like a sacrifice. It looked like a ledger of a small business that had not once collected on its invoices. My phone pulsed once on the counter. A text from Colin Weathers, Clear Sunday. I'll bring a truck. Drop keys at your place or leave them under the turtle. He meant the little bronze turtle that holds extra nails on the porch table. He meant, we've already chosen. He meant this is logistics, not permission. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and set the pen dead center on the ledger, neat as a rule. I pulled the white enamel key bowl closer, nudged the lodge keys with the back of a knuckle like you do with something delicate. The metal was winter cold. I walked to the sliding door, thumbed it open, and stepped into the thin sun. The porch boards were dry, the rail bright from where I sanded it last August. A crow croaked from the ridge, and then decided he'd said enough. Down the hill, a pickup made the turn past the mailboxes and caught a slice of light across its windshield. I slid the door shut again and listened to the instant difference the hush houses make when you take your hand off the world. The glove felt heavy now, though it didn't weigh anything. I hung it back on its nail and let it rest beside its twin, the pair of them playing at prayer. Then I returned to the ledger and wrote in the top margin in letters just large enough to see when I didn't want to. This ends when I say it ends. I closed the cover and smoothed it with my palm as if I could smooth everything. In the key bowl, the lodge keys flashed once and went still. By morning, the key bowl looked as if it had been watching me all night, metal glinting like an eye that knew every thought I'd rehearsed and rejected. I pulled on boots, zipped my parka to the chin, and drove into town while the lake still wore its pale band of mist. Silver Pine Diner keeps the lights on, whether anyone asks it to or not. The door rang twice on the bell. The smell of scorched coffee and buttered toast did its usual good work. A trucker at the counter argued gently with the radio about snowpack. I slid into the last booth where a rip in the vinyl taped with clear packing tape made a small moon under the fluorescent hum. Usual May asked her pencil already on the pad. Strong, I said, and a sigh of quiet. She poured left me with steam and a chipped mug. The window gave me a slice of Main Street pawn shop neon, blinking a wooden sandwich board outside the hardware store with chain up painted in white block letters. I took a napkin and wrote 2 lines that weren't exactly a plan and weren't exactly a prayer. Then I folded the napkin once, twice, and slipped it into my coat sleeve the way I used to slip hall passes when I taught and wanted to keep the day from running away with itself. At Sierra Vista Credit Union, the heat was turned too high, and an artificial ficus made a brave attempt at shade. The teller Whitaker, his badge said, had a face like someone you'd trust to feed your cat while you were gone. I gave him my name, my member number, and the sentences I'd practiced at the diner. I need to cancel recurring transfers, I said, all of them. He clicked at the keyboard, the keys bright and eager. Rent contributions to a joint household account ending in 3421, he read. Monthly, every first Friday. Auto pay to a Visa in another name last 4, 9927 marked household miscellaneous. He looked up, voice more careful. Any reason I should note in the file? Yes, I said, and let my breath come all the way in and all the way out, because the transfers were assumed to be permanent. Whitaker's mouth thinned, then softened. We have language for what folks do to seniors without calling it by its worst name. He didn't say the worst name. He printed forms on paper that still smelled of warm toner and slid them across with a blue pen. Initial here to halt each automatic payment. Sign here to require in-person authorization on any new transfer out of your accounts. We can set an alert to your landline for anything over 200. My hand shook once, and then steadied the way a skater's blade finds the flat. I signed. The pages made that dry whisper when stacked, the sound of something concluding without ceremony. Give it 24 hours, he said. Sometimes the system keeps its old habits for a day. Don't we all, I said. When I stepped back into the cold, a gull rode a thermal along the highway, median white and serene against the bright blue. My gloves. Daniel's gloves were in the passenger seat where I'd put them last winter and never moved. I slipped one on just the right and turned the key in the ignition. By noon, the locksmith's truck rattled into the drive letters, hand-painted Allen's Lock and Safe. Allen was compact and quiet, with a forearm tattoo of a compass rose and a voice that made every word sound like a careful decision. He spread a canvas roll on the porch, revealing a glinting army of picks and bits and a drill that hummed like a dentist who never forgot to be gentle. We'll swap deadbolts and handles, he said, eyes on the door, as if he were greeting an old acquaintance. Back door, too. Side gate if you want it. I want it, I said. He worked in clean rhythms. Measure mark drill brush. Away the small curls of cedar that fell like pencil shavings. Test the throw oil the latch, so the click sounded like a punctuation mark, not an apology. When he finished, he placed 4 keys in my hand. New cut keys have their own cold, bright weight. These felt heavier than metal and lighter. You need spares, he asked. Not today. He nodded as if that were a correct answer on an exam and packed his tools. When his truck turned at the mailbox and dropped out of sight, I stood in the porch light halo and fit one of the new keys into the lock. The bolt slid home with a sound I recognized in my bones. The library sits at the edge of town where the pines open their hands a little. It's a brick rectangle with a pitched roof and a fireplace that someone convinced the county to keep. I went in for the heat and the paper, and because you can tell a story to yourself there without anyone asking you to fill out a form. Past the stacks of biographies, presidents I had no use for, and obscure painters I did. There's a bulletin board with all the optimism you could want. ESL classes, a craft swap, a meeting for a group called Memoir Circle, handwritten in thick black marker. Tell it so it doesn't tell you. The meeting had already started. A half moon of chairs, women, mostly boots, clustered by the hearth like contented animals. I stood at the threshold long enough to be noticed, and then not long enough to be invited to change my mind. "Come on," the woman at the center said, patting the empty seat beside her. "I'm Ruth." She had the kind of gray hair that fights neatness and wins, and a posture that said her back had done hard work and didn't resent it. "I'm Marion," I said, and took the seat. The circle turned and made room the way competent people do, without drama. They were talking about beginnings, about first lines that forced the second to appear. A woman with a knitted headband read a paragraph about a father's watch. A man with a scar like a comma under his eye read a sentence that had a child's laugh in it, disguised as a grocery list. When it came to me, I didn't read. I said, "My daughter told me last night that Christmas was for immediate family." Ruth's mouth moved in a shape too small to be a wince. "And what are you?" she asked. "Not unkind. Clinical like a good nurse." "Interim," I said, and that surprised me enough to make the room go still. We didn't unpack it there. We do not always unpack every suitcase the first time we come in from the cold. Ruth walked me to the lobby when we broke, pulled a pen from behind her ear, wrote a name and a number on the back of a folded brochure, her handwriting forward-leaning, no nonsense. "Maxwell Pierce," she said. "Lawyer. Doesn't waste your time, won't waste his. If you tell him what happened, he will ask for proof. Give him proof." "What kind?" I asked. "The kind you can stack on a table," she said. "Not the kind you cry through." She tucked the paper into my palm. "And Marion, if love doesn't draw lines, it erases people." I walked out into the afternoon with the number a library card renewed for the first time in 3 years, and the sensation that my coat sat better on my shoulders. The sky had the hard, generous blue you get after a wind scrubs the clouds away. I drove to Maxwell Pierce's office without stopping at home, because sometimes rest is what you get after the thing you've been avoiding admits you were right to avoid it. Pierce and Hale share an old craftsman on cedar. The receptionist had perfect red nails and a command of silence. Maxwell came out wearing a brown suit that had survived a season, and a tie the color of a coffee stain that went stylish by mistake. He shook my hand like a man reading a book and finding his place again. "Miss Blake," he said, "let's sit where the light's decent." We took a table by the window. I put my leather folder down, the one that had somehow gathered my life into paper receipts, the ledger, the notation from Whitaker about the halt on transfers. Pierce didn't interrupt. He didn't nod at the sad parts or flinch at the expensive ones. He looked at documents the way a forester looks at rings in a stump, counting, measuring, respecting. When I finished, he tapped the corner of the ledger with his index finger. "This is clean," he said. "If you were on the other side of this table, this is the exact kind of record you'd hope didn't exist." "I kept it because I'm a teacher," I said. "We write things down." "Teachers are the last good bureaucrats," he said, almost smiling. He set the ledger aside and folded his hands. "I'll tell you how I work, Miss Blake. I don't argue feelings. I file facts. Evidence, not tears." The phrase went through me like a key through a lock already cut. "I can do that," I said. "Good," he said. "If anyone shows up here in the name of concern, you write down the time, their names, what they said, what they left behind. If anything arrives by mail, you bring it to me. Consider installing cameras at your entries and the main hall, not to spy, to timestamp ordinary competence. People say wild things when they're trying to reorganize someone else's life." "I can manage that," I said. "And one more thing," he said. "An evaluation from a neutral clinician is helpful when strangers decide they are experts on your brain. I work with Dr. Naomi Lang. She's exact and not interested in flattery. If she says you can run a household, it will mean something." "Schedule it," I said, and surprised us both. On the drive home, a patrol SUV idled at the turnout where the plows park. The officer waved 2 fingers from the wheel the way locals do when their day is more weather than crime. A road sign flashed its orange message, "Chains required on Summit." I stopped at the hardware store for 4 micro SD cards, the size of clipped fingernails, and a small box that turned 4 camera feeds into pictures I could see on my television. The kid at the register had a nose ring and the patience of a monk and made sure the receipts printed legibly. I put them in the folder with the others. The installation crew came before dusk, 2 men in navy fleece with cable ties looped around their wrists like bracelets. They worked without commentary, only a murmur of measurements and a respectful step around the red gloves on their nail. By the time they left, a tiny red dot winked by the front door, and another did its steady blink down the hall. In the living room, the television showed me my empty porch like a theater that had not yet admitted the audience. I sat in Daniel's chair and watched myself cross the frame straight back to a woman carrying a folder. The image was ordinary and quiet, which is the trick. Quiet can be a ledger too. It was full dark when the doorbell rang. Not the door itself. This door had a chime that played 4 clear notes, like a child practicing a scale. I stood, not rehearsed, not ready, and opened to find Tessa on the step, wrapped to the eyebrows in a coat, the color of good whiskey, her hair a glossy argument with winter. Behind her, Colin smiled in his careful way. Between them stood a man I didn't know in a coat too thin for the weather, and a smile tuned 12% friendlier than whatever he felt. "Mom," Tessa said. She leaned in to kiss the air 1/2 inch from my cheek, a gesture that takes practice and offers nothing. We were in the neighborhood. "This is Victor." "Victor Harlan," he said, as if the name should sit down and make itself comfortable. He extended a hand. His palm was cool and precise. "I help families navigate difficult seasons." "Do you?" I said. Colin lifted a white envelope, the kind HOA committees use when they want to look official. "This came to our place," he said. "Must have been misdelivered. Something about seasonal safety at the lodge. The drive is so steep, Mom. We worry about ice." Tessa produced a tri-fold brochure with a photo of a smiling nurse and a pen clipped to the corner. "And the pharmacy had these," she said. "Little memory screens. Everyone does them now. No big deal." I stepped back just enough to make space and not more. The hall camera's red dot kept its heartbeat. I could smell Tessa's perfumed citrus and money, and Colin's aftershave, and the paper chemical of the envelope. "Come in," I said, and gestured them to the living room. Victor's eyes did a quick survey door stairs mantel exit. He perched on the edge of the sofa as if he did not intend to be here long enough to be comfortable. Tessa sat beside him, coat still on, as if she expected applause for stopping by. Colin hovered at the mantel where a photo of Daniel and me held the place the lodge once held unarguable. Victor folded his hands, a textbook pyramid, and rested them on one knee. "It's cold," he said warmly. "These holiday weeks can be a lot." For who, I asked. For everyone, he said, and his smile did not shift at all. "Sometimes it's helpful to create structures that take the pressure off. Help with bills, with property management, with keys," Tessa said lightly, as if we were talking about appetizers. "Like practical things." Colin cleared his throat. "We're just trying to keep you from slipping on the drive, Marion." I picked up the HOA envelope and slid a fingernail under the flap. The letter inside wore bold text and a scatter of clip art snowflakes. "Seasonal reminder. Please salt walkways and drive. Check roof for ice dams. Contact approved vendors for steep roof service." It was addressed to owners in a font that looked like someone's notion of authority. "This isn't addressed to me," I said, "or to you." "It's about you," Tessa said brightly. "Which is close." Victor leaned forward a measure. "Families can be proactive," he offered. "When older relatives live alone, it can be comforting to put some decisions in steadier hands." "I know my hands," I said. He didn't blink, and yet there are 100 ways to argue with a person who brings you concern in a suit. None of them are louder than paper. I set the HOA letter on the coffee table next to the credit union forms and the receipt from Silver Pine. I took the trifold from Tessa and read the heading aloud. "Cognitive quick check. Simple questions for peace of mind." "I prefer complicated peace," I said, and placed the brochure face down. Victor rose without making it look like retreat. "We didn't want to intrude," he said, "which is what people say as they intrude. We'll let you get back to your evening." Tessa stood the coat, swishing. She put her hand on my forearm, then reconsidered and took it back. "We love you," she said like a signature. Colin nodded. "Sunday is still good for us," he said softly. I opened the door. Winter pressed a cool hand to all our faces. "Drive safe," I said. When I closed the door, the chime's last note hung a heartbeat in the air. The house inhaled and exhaled. I carried the HOA letter and the brochure to the dining table and laid them with the other papers. The halted transfers, the hardware receipt, a narrow strip of paper from the library desk, noting the renewal on my card. The television in the corner still showed the empty porch in a box within the screen, a small theater playing a single scene on loop, a door, a mat, a rail. The red dot stayed steady. I took Daniel's right-hand glove from its nail, turned it once, and set it beside the ledger. Then in the top margin of the next clean page I wrote, "Evidence not tears." The pen made its small sound neat and final. Outside, the lake breathed its winter breath and kept its own counsel. Inside the keys in the bowl lay very still. The envelope arrived with the noon mail thick enough to make the slot complain. I knew it belonged to something that wanted the room before I turned it over. Nevada District Court sat in the corner like a small threat printed in blue. I set it on the dining table beside the ledger and the key bowl and opened it with the butter knife that has lifted more than its share of lids. Petition for guardianship. The words were ordinary until they climbed on each other. Tessa's name. Collins. Phrases that sounded helpful until they snapped shut. Undue risk, diminished capacity assistance required. Attached statements on tinted paper. One from Mr. Dalton across the way who claims I call to people who aren't there when I am speaking to jays in the juniper. Another from Ms. Kim at the pharmacy, client confused instructions written on a day when the register died and every line doubled. At the back a summary by Dr. Gerald Kane, MD, psychiatry telehealth provider. No appointment time. No date I remembered. No conversation I had. I stood at the window with the pages in my hand. Lake light bounced off the snow so bright I could feel it under my eyelids. The glove hung on its nail red and unafraid. My chest did a small animal's quick breathing, then remembered the bigger animal underneath it. I spread the papers flat and read them again, because that is what you do when someone borrows your life and drafts a version. I wrote the date in my teacher's print in the top right corner. I wrote who delivered the envelope and at what hour. I stacked the statements, clipped them, and sat with my hands open on the table until the skin on my palms cooled. The room had the clean smell the heater gives cedar when it first starts. The camera in the hall held its single red bead of attention. When the first shutter finished, I put on Daniel's gloves and my coat and took the keys from the bowl. I told no one. The Subaru remembered the way to Lakeside Cemetery without asking directions. The plows had left their dark shoulders of snow along the lane. Tire tracks made a pair of punctuation marks all the way to the bend. Wind combed the pines with slow fingers. The sky had that flat winter look gray with a kind of authority. Daniel's stone is where the hill lifts its chin. I brushed a scallop of snow from his name and set my gloves on top of the granite palm to palm, like hands warming a prayer. The cold traveled straight through the cloth into my bones. I told the empty air in one straight line what the papers said. I said Tessa's name, and then I did not say it again for a minute because the second time would have broken something I didn't want broken. I am here, I said. The words went nowhere and stayed anyway. You do not get answers from a stone. You get the space to say the question the way it needs saying. I stayed until the wind changed a long, clean breath off the water that moved the branches and set the small flags along the veterans' row to a single shared direction. I took the gloves back and pressed them once to the cold name and stood. The ground under the snow was solid and ordinary. My boots made a sound I trusted. On the way home, the Subaru heater blew warm on my shins, and old Motown came up faint from the radio music with a spine. I drove slower than I needed to. At the house, I carried the envelope to the dining table and called Pearson Hale. Maxwell answered himself. Miss Blake. I have papers, I said. Filed ones. Bring them, he said. The office smelled like dust jacket glue and lemon oil. Maxwell cleared a space on the table with the back of his hand, and I poured out the envelope like I was upending a box of nails. He stacked each piece by type and date, and then read silently, his forefinger traveling under sentences as if they were lines on a map. He didn't make a sound when he got to Dr. Kane's report. He held it by the corner like something in a lab. He said all right in a voice that would work a skittish horse. I didn't meet him, I said. I see that, he said. He tapped the page lightly. This is opinion invented for the convenience of a petition. We'll get better ink. He made 2 calls with the ease of a man who liked the part of his day that involved removing knots. The first to his assistant for certified copies of what I brought. The second to Dr. Naomi Lang. He didn't sell me to her or her to me. He read her a date and my name and an hour that would be held for me. You'll want to be on time, he said, hanging up. She is more precise than I am. I can be on time, I said. You already are, he said, and pushed a legal pad toward me. Now, let me hear you tell me what happened without using the word feel. Not because feeling is nothing, because they've built a story that counts on it. I told him the credit union, the forms, the locks, the cameras, the envelope. I gave him timestamps. He wrote them in small print as neat as mine. When I finished, he clicked the cap back onto his pen. Good, he said. Put the HOA letter and the memory screen brochure in this folder. List who brought them. We will not argue with concern. We will weigh it. Dr. Lang's office is in a low building near the orthopedic clinic. The waiting room had 2 chairs, not more a square of sunlight warming the carpet and the quiet of a place that doesn't need a television to make itself seem busy. Dr. Lang shook my hand and watched whether my hand met hers. Her suit was gray in a way that made it impossible to guess its price. Her voice had the mild California Atlantic under it that happens to people who live two places at once. "We'll go through a protocol," she said. "I'll explain as we go." She offered water, which I declined, and a pencil, which I accepted not because I needed it, but because I always took pencils from people who knew how to sharpen them. She asked me for the date, the day, the season, the address of the building we sat in. She asked me to repeat back 5 words and then to forget them for a while on purpose. She asked me to draw a clock and set the hands at 11:10, and I did, thinking of the way the boys used to drag my hallway rug sideways like a tail when they were small. She gave me a list of bills and coins and a check stub and asked me to make change for a purchase, and I summed the numbers out loud the way I did with kids who hated math until they didn't. She handed me a card with a proverb on it and said, "Tell me what that means to you," and I told her without telling a story. She slid a little wooden puzzle toward me and asked me to build what was printed on a card. The blocks made a small city of right angles and patient instruction. She asked me to explain how I'd get from the library to the hardware store by avoiding the hill with black ice in January. I watched the map rise up in my head and named the corners and the landmarks: the thrift store with the orange couch, the empty lot where the snowplows sleep, the donut shop that burns its oil on Fridays. She wrote without rolling her eyes, which is to say, she wrote like a person whose writing matters. An hour passed, then another. On the last page, she handed me a sheet with lines and asked me to copy the lines while she talked. We talked about paint colors that never look like their names. She talked about a porch that catches morning sun. When I finished, she looked down and then at me. "Thank you, Miss Blake," she said. "I'll write while the work is warm." "Do you need anything else from me?" I asked, because teachers ask that. "Yes," she said. "A signature for release to your counsel, and a minute to sit and do nothing. People leave here and run too fast." I sat in the small chair and did nothing like it was a practice. Out in the hall, someone laughed in a way that didn't dismiss anyone. The sunlight had moved an inch. I signed the release. By the time I reached Cedar Street, Pierce had received a fax that sounded like a waterfall in the receptionist's machine. He read it once, then again, and slid it across. The header carried Dr. Lang's name in the tidy font of people who do not waste their ink. The words beneath were simple and unbothered, intact orientation. Superior performance on tasks of executive function for age, no evidence of cognitive decline, manages complex household tasks independently. I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath until it left me all at once. Maxwell let me read as long as I wished. "This is what I needed," I said. "It is what you have," he said. He walked me through a handful of questions he guessed would come from people who preferred guesswork. He sat in one chair and then another and made his voice mild, then officious, then bored. "Answer what was asked," he said. "No stories, unless a story is the shortest route to the truth." "Did you change your locks?" "Yes." "When?" "Tuesday, 1:15. "Why?" "Because I had keys made for me and I chose to be the only person who uses them." He made a small mark when I wandered. He nodded when I did not. Ruth came by the office because she said she happened to be near, which may or may not have been true. She wore a red scarf the color of my glove and handed Maxwell an envelope with a signed statement inside. "I have observed. Miss Blake read her work aloud, manage time for a group, and navigate ice like a woman who grew up with winters." Ruth looked at me like she does with everyone she has decided belongs in the circle and squeezed my elbow once quick enough to deny it. I drove home with the folder buckled into the passenger seat as if it were a living thing. The lake had traded its dull winter for something with a little chrome in it. In the kitchen, the chili I had cooled 2 nights ago waited in its glass container without reproach. I warmed it and ate at the counter standing the way I eat, when I don't want to pretend there is company. The television showed the porch and the hall in their small squares. In one, a jay landed on the rail, cocked his head at his reflection in the glass, and left my frame for his own life. I took the ledger down and opened to the page where I had written "Evidence Not Tears" in the top margin. Under it, I wrote 2 neat lines. 1, Dr. Lang report received C-file. 2, timestamp of visitors last night. 6:42 p.m., Harlan Tessa Collin. I added the HOA letter to the stack with a paperclip and squared the edges until they satisfied. On the sideboard, the key bowl held its silver silence. On the nail, the red glove did its plain work. I turned off the kitchen light with the side of my hand and stood in the soft dark until my eyes made the room again. The house breathed in the way wood breathes. The lake breathed in the way lakes do. I put the folder in the center of the table and set the fountain pen across it as if it were an answer that could keep a page from lifting. The camera's red dot winks when the heater kicks on and holds when the room is still. It held. I rested my palm on the folder, the way you rested on a sleeping child's back, not to control the breath, but to witness it. Outside snow made its quiet argument with the dark. Inside the paper remembered every line I'd written and offered me back my own handwriting. The courthouse in Minden looks like a school that decided one day to become stern brick square windows, a flag that worked the wind hard. Maxwell met me under the portico with a paper cup of water and that steadying nod he gives when there are fewer words than tasks. I had Daniel's right glove in my pocket, the wool warming itself on my palm. Inside, the air smelled of varnish and dry heat. A bailiff with a voice like gravel announced the docket. Victor Harlan sat at the petitioner's table with Tessa and Colin arranged beside him, their coats draped over the backs of their chairs like they'd paid for the seats. Tessa's smile found me and didn't commit. Colin looked at the table the way men look at a project they think they can finish in an afternoon. "Miss Blake." Maxwell held my gaze a beat. "Answer what's asked." "I will," I said. We stood when the judge entered, a man with a careful face and a gavel he seemed to want to use honestly. The clerk read case numbers, papers shuffled like small nervous birds. Victor stood first. His suit had the newness of things that haven't had to work yet. "Your Honor," he began, "this is a simple petition. A loving daughter and son-in-law seek clarity and support for an aging parent who through no fault faces increasing difficulty managing property and safety. Winter conditions on a steep drive complex finances a large home. These are not abstractions." He lifted the HOA letter in a gloved hand as if it were a statute. Even her neighborhood association expresses concern. Witnesses have observed confusion. A licensed psychiatrist has confirmed cognitive decline. He set the papers down gently like medical instruments. Maxwell didn't rise immediately. He let the quiet fill its shape. When he stood, he buttoned his jacket like a man acknowledging a rule rather than a fashion. "Your Honor, we'll show the court what exists on paper and film rather than in supposition. We'll call 3 witnesses. We'll submit a clinical evaluation. And we'll ask the court to read the HOA letter for what it is, a winter reminder addressed to owners as a class, not an indictment of one." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Victor called Mr. Dalton first. Dalton wore his good hat to the stand and took it off only because the bailiff told him to. He cleared his throat toward the microphone and tilted it until it caught more breath than voice. "You submitted a statement," Victor said. "Would you tell the court what you observed?" Dalton glanced at Tessa before he answered. "Heard her out there talking to people who ain't there," he said. "Hands going. In the junipers." "Does this occur frequently?" "Couple times," Dalton said, "when I'm out on the porch." Maxwell rose. "Mr. Dalton," he said mildly, "have you ever spoken with Ms. Blake?" "Nah." "Do you know what a scrub jay sounds like when it lands in a juniper?" Dalton squinted. "A bird," he said. Maxwell nodded. "When you wrote your statement, who asked you to?" Dalton shifted. "Lady came by," he said. "Said she was helping the family." "Did she come alone?" Dalton looked toward Tessa again. "No." No further questions. Ms. Kim from the pharmacy took the stand next, coat folded in her lap like a shield. She sat straight and answered in a quiet run-on. "You wrote that Ms. Blake seemed confused," Victor said. "Is that accurate?" "The register system was down," she said. "We were doing manual labels, a line to the back. Ms. Reed," she nodded toward Tessa without looking, stood with Ms. Blake and answered questions for her. "I asked Ms. Blake to confirm dosage." Miss Reed answered again. "That is what I wrote." It looked like confusion. Maxwell stepped to the rail. "Miss Kim, did you ever see Miss Blake misfill a prescription or appear unable to pay or sign?"
"No," Miss Kim said. "She pays in cash or card. She signs her name without trouble."
"Thank you." Victor introduced the report from Dr. Gerald Kane with the solemnity of a flag presentation. "Licensed psychiatrist," he said. "Findings indicate decline consistent with—" Maxwell held out a hand. "Your Honor, may I voir dire the witness through counsel?"
The judge nodded.
"Mr. Harlan," Maxwell said, "did Dr. Kane meet Ms. Blake?" Victor smoothed a page. "Telehealth evaluation," he said. "Date?" Victor named one. Maxwell turned to me. "Miss Blake, where were you on that date at the listed time?" I said at Sierra Vista Credit Union canceling transfers and handed over the stamped slip Whitaker had printed with the hour and teller number. Maxwell faced the bench. "Your Honor, we moved to strike Dr. Kane's report as unreliable and contradicted by contemporaneous documentary evidence. The telehealth never took place." The judge looked over his readers at the stamp, then down at the report. He drew a single line through the exhibit number. "Stricken." Victor's mouth tightened a fraction, then smoothed. Maxwell called Dr. Naomi Lang. She walked to the stand the way people walk when the floor is familiar. She took the oath like a person who can say yes without ceremony. Dr. Lang, Maxwell said, credentials for the record. She gave them without embroidery training board certification years focus. "You evaluated Miss Blake when—" "Yesterday morning," she said, 2 hours. "And your findings?" "Ms. Blake is oriented to time-place person. She demonstrates intact attention, memory, and executive function. On tasks involving planning, spatial reasoning, and multi-step instruction, she performed above average for her cohort. I observed no evidence of cognitive decline." "Your methods?" She described the clock, the change-making, the route, planning the proverb, the blocks. She named the standardized tools in their Latin-planted English. She didn't apologize for the science or glamorize it. Victor rose for cross. Dr. Lang, older adults can present well in structured settings. They can, Dr. Lang said. That is why we use multiple measures. Could anxiety improve performance briefly? No, she said. Anxiety typically impairs performance. Had Ms. Blake been impaired, I would have seen it in specific errors. He tried another angle, and she refused it by telling the truth in a sentence half the length. He sat. Maxwell submitted the camera stills next me carrying groceries at 9:18 a.m. Me unlocking the porch door with the new key at 1:15 p.m., me writing in the ledger at 6:03 p.m. The timestamp sat in the bottom right corner as modestly as a page number. He handed up the credit union forms with my initials in the little blue boxes. The clerk marked each exhibit with a soft thump of rubber and ink. The HOA letter, the judge asked. Maxwell passed it to the clerk. Addressed to owners as a group, Your Honor. It asks each to salt walkways and check for ice dams. It does not assign incompetence. It assigns winter. The judge read, squinting. So it does. Maxwell looked at me, Miss Blake. I took the stand and felt the small lift of wood under my shoes. The oath tasted formal and clean. Maxwell's questions were the kind that had only one answer if you tell the truth. Did you change your locks? Yes. When? Tuesday, 1:15. Why? So that only the person who lives in the house uses the keys. Did you cancel recurring transfers from your accounts to a household account, not in your name? Yes. Why? Because I had made them and I had the right to end them. Do you manage your household food bills, maintenance without assistance? Yes. He nodded, and that was all. Victor tried one question, voice soft. Ms. Blake, your daughter loves you. Would you agree she is concerned? I agree she has said so, I said. No further questions. The judge folded his hands and looked down the bench at nobody, which is how judges aim at everybody. He spoke with the cadence of a man who has said too many things the wrong way before learning the right way to say them once. The petition seeks to establish guardianship, he said. The standard is not suspicion. The standard is evidence. He tapped the stack in front of him. What I have is an unreliable medical summary statements that wilt when examined a winter memo to an entire neighborhood, and on the other side, contemporaneous documentation of financial management video that shows routine competence and a clinical evaluation of unimpaired cognition. He lifted the gavel and set it down, not hard but final. Petition denied. Ms. Blake retains full authority over her person and estate. The room breathed as if someone had opened a door. Tessa's face changed first, and then arranged itself into something that could walk down a hallway. Colin stared at his hands. Victor made a note he would never need. The bailiff called the next case. Papers were gathered, then ungathered, then put away in the wrong order and corrected. Maxwell touched the back of my chair with 2 fingers, and that counted as a celebration. In the corridor, the windows looked out on a parking lot where the wind had made drifts in the space nobody wanted. Ruth stood near the vending machine, a scarf red as foxglove around her neck, as if her errands had led coincidentally to this floor. She didn't step in. She didn't need to. She raised a palm. I matched it. Outside, the flag snapped and released, snapped and released. Maxwell offered his hand, and I took it. You did precisely what was required, he said, which felt like being told the truth in a language I still spoke. I pressed the wool of the glove in my pocket and stepped down onto the cold concrete. The sky had the bright blank expression winter wears when it has more to say, and the air carried the metal taste that comes after snow has been scolded by sun. I walked to the car with the folder under my arm and the keys in my coat, the weight of both correct and ordinary. The clerk at Merritt & Snow slid the closing packet across a table that smelled faintly of lemons and dust. The documents wore their square stamps and calm margins like uniforms. I signed where the flags told me to sign, date where the bright yellow arrows asked to be dated. The buyer's agent shook my hand as if we'd just finished a neighborly chore. When it was done, someone said congratulations, and the room exhaled. Blue Fir Lodge waited one last time on the hill. I parked crooked as I always did when I meant to stay only a minute, and stepped onto the porch with the envelope of final papers tucked under my arm. The cedar wind chime made its low, wooden vowel. I took the key bowl in both hands and turned it once so the glaze caught winter sun. 4 new-cut keys lay inside, bright as fish, still smelling faintly of machine oil. I lifted them, felt their cold, correct weight, and placed them in the buyer's envelope. The red glove hung on its nail by the back door. I pressed the wool to my mouth and then set it in my coat pocket, where it warmed by knowing where it belonged. At Sierra Elder Justice, the lobby held 2 chairs and a poster about phone scams that had been tacked up with care. A woman in a cardigan that had seen better winters brought out a triplicate receipt pad and an ink pad with more history than ink. I wrote the number with my father's fountain pen, 1.4 million, and the digits walked across the line with the steady gait I recognized from my old ledger. The woman stamped the receipt, looked up as if to check I hadn't made a mistake, and then seeing that I hadn't said "Thank you, Miss Blake," in a voice that had learned how to be simple. "You'll put it to use," I said. "We will," she said, and she didn't offer a photo. We stood there a second, nothing theatrical, while the carbon copy dried. The condo sits 3 floors up in a building that believes in glass. Afternoon light enters as if invited and takes a seat. Ruth carried a box marked kitchen to the counter and made a face at the tangle of spatulas, like a woman meeting cousins she'd only heard about. I hauled books lined spines by color because it pleased me, not because it meant anything. We found a place for the chime on the small balcony. When the lake wind moved it, the sound came thinner than the lodge's porch, but true enough. I set the key bowl on the narrow table by the door and let the red glove claim the hook beside it. Ruth boiled the first kettle-made coffee that bordered on holy and handed me a mug with a chip on the lip that made every sip feel like something to be mindful about. We unpacked silently for a while, the good kind of quiet, the kind that makes rooms remember people. On the television stand, the little box that stitched camera feeds into pictures sat like a retired tool. I unplugged it, coiled the cord, and tucked it into the drawer where warranties go. At Memoir Circle, the fire had decided to behave, and the chairs were set in a truer half-moon than before. I brought a page. Ruth nodded at me from the center without ceremony. "You have something," she said, and it was not a question. I read a single paragraph. It began, "The night the lake wore a necklace, my phone said immediate family, and the house answered first. No one clapped. They didn't need to. A woman in a denim jacket rubbed her thumb along the seam of her jeans and said, 'There it is.' A man with the comma scar tilted his head as if listening for a train in the distance. We went around the circle and the words arranged themselves like cups on a shelf within reach. Later the condo's windows colored themselves with evening. The lake laid down its metal and took up glass. I stood on the balcony in my sweater, coffee cooling in my hands, the chime giving one small answer and then resting. Below a couple walked a dog who refused to admit the walk was over. Across the water porch, light stitched a line that didn't quite hold, which was its own kind of beauty. Inside, I opened the ledger I had carried too long for only one purpose, and wrote a new column heading with the old pen received. Under it, I put 4 entries closing complete. Receipt stamped, keys home. Page read aloud. The ink dried with a faint shine and then settled. I set the book on the sideboard and left it open. The heater gave the room its light cedar breath. The key bowl kept its silvery quiet. I hung the glove on its hook and let it be a glove, not a relic. Then I turned off the lamp and watched the room hold its shape in the soft dark the way rooms do when they have learned their names. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.